Hello, welcome. I'm Jan Richardson, and I have prepared this worship service for those of us who will meet on the church lawn August the 30th at 10:30 a.m. and for those who will participate through the video. May the words and ways in which we are led in this worship service help to inspire us to heed the call in this time and this place in all our unique opportunities and ways we have been gifted and led by the Spirit. A particular announcement I'd like to make has to do with a survey that you might have seen through the group email list, and if you're not on it and would like to be, please be in touch with our church office or through our Facebook page. This is asking for your participation to answer questions that will hopefully be part of our then board discussion on September 8th. We would like to relaunch in safe and yet sort of formalized and wonderful ways to be in our sanctuary in person again on September the 13th. And we'd like to know how people are feeling and thinking about that because of the very many different ways living with COVID is part of our home life and community life. We're led into worship today as we light the candle, knowing that our biblical story to focus upon is Exodus chapter 3, the call of Moses, where he is attentive to the voice of God coming from a burning bush. So we light our candle and we center ourselves as we reflect on this quote from Parker Palmer, a wise elder in our midst in North America. Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Ted Loder gathers us in prayer by offering us these words. Let us share them. Believing our lives are touched by you, O God, that you want something for us and of us, we pray. Give us ears to hear you, eyes to see the tracing of your fingers, and hearts quickened by the motions of your Spirit. Amen. And Walter Farquharson and Ron Klusmeyer wrote this song together that we will now listen to or sing along as we are able in our private ways. Teach me, God, to wonder. It's number 299 in Voices United.
Praise you.
Little joke. Biblical humor. George W. Bush meets Moses. George W. Bush was walking through an airport when he saw an old man with white hair, a long white beard, wearing a long robe, and holding a staff. He walked up to the man, who was staring at the ceiling, and, "Excuse me, sir, aren't you Moses?" The man stood perfectly still and continued to stare at the ceiling, saying nothing. Again, George W. asked, a little louder this time. "Excuse me, sir, aren't you Moses?" Again, the old man stared at the ceiling, motionless, without saying a word. George W. tried a third time, louder yet. "Excuse me, sir, aren't you Moses?" Again, no movement or words from the old man. He just continued to stare at the ceiling. One of George W.'s aides then asked him if there was a problem, and George W. said, "Either this man is deaf or extremely rude. I have asked him 3 times if he was Moses, and he has not answered me yet." To which the old man, still staring at the ceiling, finally replied to the aide, "I can hear him, and yes, I am Moses, but the last time I spoke to a bush, I spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness." So our reading from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 15, where Moses is dutifully tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, priest of Midian, and out of the blue a burning bush catches his eye. It is ablaze, but it is not consumed. What does it mean? Linny, a good friend and biblical storyteller who lives in Summerland, BC, will now share her fabulous way of taking the story from memory and sharing it with us today.
Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock just beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, but it wasn't being consumed. Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and find out why the bush is not being burned." When God saw that he had turned aside, God called out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." He said, "Here I am." God said, "Come no further. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place that you are standing is holy ground." Then he said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Then Moses hid his face because he was afraid to see God. God said to Moses, "I have observed this misery of my people living in Egypt. I've heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their suffering. So I've come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, to bring them out of that land and to take them to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has come to me now, and I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So, come, I will send you to the Pharaoh to bring the Israelites out of Egypt." Moses said, "Who am I to go to the Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I will go with you, And this will be a sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the Israelites out of Egypt, then come here and you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said, if I go to the Israelites and I tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they're going to ask me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? God said, I am who I am. I was who I was. I will be who I will be. I was who I am who I will be. Just say to them, I am has sent you. No. Don't say to the Israelites, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. That is my name forever. That is my title for all generations.
We open ourselves in response to the biblical story and its timeless truths by then following it with this responsive reading written by Macrina Weidecker in the book Seasons of Your Heart. The Moses in my heart trembles, not quite willing to accept the prophet hidden in my being, wondering how much it will cost to allow that prophet to emerge. O child of unnecessary shoes, cast them off and stand in readiness on this holy ground. For the Egypt in people's lives demands that you see the burning bushes all around you, a flame burning wildly, calling you away from the comfort of well-protected feet. The ground you stand on is holy. Take off your shoes. The ground of your being is holy. Take off your shoes. Awaken your sleeping prophet. Believe in your Moses and go. I begin my message by telling you about a distracted driving incident, my own confession from last Saturday when we were headed to Rosebud. I wasn't distracted like the usual by my phone, but just when I was about to make a left-hand turn onto Highway 56 at what I and many Stettlerites call the KFC corner, this dinger in our car sounded, and that's the sound that alerts us to one of our seat belts not being fastened properly. And I'd already looked and noticed that the light was green and there was going to be an opportunity for me to turn. But in that brief interval, my realization, my attention went to checking the seat belts, and all of a sudden I realized that because I was distracted by the dinger, the light switched from yellow to then red, and I found myself still sitting in the middle of the intersection. I felt terrible. All I could do was give a polite wave to those drivers who'd been attentive enough to be patient with me as I proceeded then on my way. What catches our attention? What's our response time? What are the things we ignore? These are questions I suggest we bring to our reflection time with this particular Bible reading. Knowing hypervigilance is not good, but seize the moment attentiveness is wonderful. It's being responsive to an opportune time or a teachable moment. It can be very important, meaningful, wonderful. It's the idea of wonder itself that Moses' response captures me as I read and listen to this text this week. Somehow he saw something that was beyond us, yet part of us. God's very presence. Wonder, writes Walter Farquharson, retired moderator, minister from Saskatchewan, author of the hymn Teach Me God to Wonder, says wonder is the opposite of taking things for granted, taking God's presence for granted. Wonder is foundational in and to our faith, for our faith. The wonder, the miracle of this story, writes another theologian, is not the bush that burns and is not consumed, but that a human being was actually aware and paid attention to God's presence, particularly God's presence in the fire, in the suffering. The fire, of course, prompts urgency. Yet where would one find water as you grazed the mount in Midian? So what does fire mean? What have we made it mean in and for our faith? To be passionate about who we are as those called by God, to not let that passion consume us, but propel us in our call to care. Moses stopped. In fact, I worry so much about those who are passionate, and burnout rages in our midst of caregiving professions and indeed volunteering. Moses stopped what he was doing to really look and listen to God calling out to him. Moses responded, "Here I am," and his life and the lives of his people were forever changed. The Spirit's urging came from within and around as Moses was drawn to what this all meant. Moses knew, just seemed to know, he needed to recognize that a burning desire to be with his people in their burdensome, troubling times was his call. He gives himself to move toward that which he now realizes he'd been running away from. It was fear that had driven Moses to the wilderness. He feared for his life because he'd taken a life of an Egyptian harsh taskmaster. We recall the backstory. Moses was a Hebrew baby, was then raised in an Egyptian palace. He'd been given the name Moses, a name meaning drawn forth. An identity crisis ensued. It immediately makes me think of 60s scoop stories I've heard from Indigenous people that are friends and colleagues. When he saw a fellow Hebrew beaten to death by the taskmaster, his impulse, his reaction was to fight back, and realizing the gravity of the situation, he fled in fear. So here in the wilderness of Midian, he had a lot of time to think. He'd been accepted into Jethro's household, married Zipporah, a Midianite, meaning he'd entered into yet another culture and religion. But Moses was trying to start this new life, and he thought he could leave his past behind. But the God of his past, the God of his ancestors, invades onto the scene. Moses wasn't out to seek or discover God, but here he's sought out and discovered and co-opted by God. As God's identity is disclosed, I am who I am, Moses discovers his own identity. The translation of God's name, I will be what I will be, is profoundly open-ended. Moses receives it as an invitation to trust, to move out into the future with this God who will be there with and for him. Life in the wilderness enables him to see more clearly who he is, who his people are, and where God fits into this whole picture. The wilderness was a place of sojourn, a space that allowed him to get in touch with what mattered most. God had entered into the suffering of the people, his people. Now Moses made it his own. So Moses questioned Moses questioned his competence for this task of leadership. God offered the assurance of divine presence. Moses would not have to act alone. God would be faithful. Aaron, Moses' brother, would be with. There would be a team, a staff. Moses would be God's human agent. Yes, he'd fled to save his life. But if he lived in fear, he was in bondage. As long as the Egyptian taskmasters had power over his kinfolk, they also had power over him. Perhaps the burning bush was a mirror. He saw himself, and he would place himself at God's disposal, allowing the burning desire to shepherd God's people to come to the fore, praying this passion would fuel but not consume him. He put back on his shoes and boldly went to stand before the Pharaoh, concerned no longer with only his individual salvation, but with the well-being of the community of God's chosen, God's people. As we move toward Labor Day in our time and place, and more workplaces open up for re-entry even as we live with COVID-19, this passage reminds us that there is no ordinary time. There is no day job that's aside from our life's work. We can't let our occupations preoccupy us to the point of forgetting we have a calling. By faith, we are asked to remember that the question isn't, what do I want to be when I grow up? It is, whose will I be, now, ever, and always? It's all decisive time, and we're invited to live into our calling with a passion for the possible. Each day we are standing on holy ground. Each day we're invited to live in response to God's call. There isn't a job out there, paid or volunteer, in which caring, compassionate people of integrity are not needed. As United Church minister, author, and artist, the one I call Jan Richardson, the other, says, "The burning bushes can be difficult to perceive. In the midst of it all, may we be given vision to see what is ours to see, courage to do what is ours to do. May we hear the voice that says to us, 'I will be with you.'" And this leads to sharing and listening to the hymn, "I have called you by your name, you are mine," number 161 in More Voices. The United Church of Canada Minute for Mission for today is a review or a reflection that was published August 24th after hosting the youth and young adult gathering called Rendezvous 2020 in a digital fashion, August 11th to 14th. In late April, the Rendezvous design team decided there couldn't be a large gathering in Calgary because of COVID-19. Plans that had been in the works for over a year were scrapped. Disappointment reigned, and there was wavering about whether to postpone to 2021, cancel completely, or reimagine. After anxious conversations, disagreements, and a few tears, the decision was made to reimagine Rendezvous 2020 as an online event. The team wanted young people to know that the church understood all they were missing, cared for them even if we couldn't be with them in person, and wanted to bless them. Rendezvous 2020 Reimagined, held August 11th to 14th, was much like a face-to-face event. There were engaging keynote speakers, lively worship sessions, home groups, a service project, as well as workshops and spiritual practice sessions too numerous to list. Each morning started with teachings by elders, and each evening ended with a fun social time. Photos were shared, chats occurred, and exhibits viewed. Some people participated from home, others took part while camping, and some joined in from church parking lots. More than 480 young people attended the various activities over the course of the event. There were participants from every province in Canada, as well as denominations, including Anglican, Lutheran, and United Church of Christ. The virtual nature of the event drew the circle wider than ever. Global partners from around the world, including the Philippines, Palestine, France, and Kenya, joined in. Together, the participants shared bold faith, created brave space, and offered one another brazen grace, all from a safe distance. Several young people thanked the church for finding a creative way to host Rendezvous. "Thank you so much for continuing with Rendezvous," one participant wrote. "I find it difficult to be in social settings at the best of times, so this was wonderful for me. I did miss creating those physical connections, but I am glad we were able to still be together, to gather from a safe distance." Following a moving keynote speech by Dr. James Makokas, a leader and well-known expert within the Indigenous, LGBTQ2, and medical community, one young person wrote, "Being a young person going through college, it makes me feel so much better when I hear someone who has failed but was able to get back on their feet. It is so inspiring." Your gifts through Mission and Service Fund are hard at work in these challenging times, supporting youth and young adults. Thank you. Your gifts help transform and save lives, inspire meaning and purpose, and build a better world. Please join me in supporting the United Church of Canada Mission and Service Fund. Reading from Romans chapter 12, 9 to 18. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with the affection of a sibling. Outdo one another in showing honor. Never flag in zeal. Be aglow with the Spirit. Serve God. Rejoice in your hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. Repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all. Friend and colleague Ted Dodd from Winnipeg then wrote prayer as he reflected upon this ancient letter to the church in Rome and held in that creative tension the timeless truths of our faith as we then offer prayers in today's world and uplift the things which are on our individual hearts and minds, and I pray held on this holy ground of our being together while separate in prayer by sharing Ted's words. Holy One, the values you would have us live are not mere niceness, not wishful thinking platitudes, not unattainable pipe dreams. You call us to lives of profound and energetic love. You guide us to ministries of compassionate and generous hospitality. You direct us to discipleship that is caring and costly. Help us commit to your kingdom values and vision. Bless our being and acting in the church with your grace and kindness. Sanctify our attitudes and behavior in the world with your mercy and mission. Let us breathe in the Holy Spirit, devoting our purposes to the common good, that we might be afire with faith and service. Let us hold one another with mutual affection and regard, seeing one another with honor and nobility, that we might build community and connection. Let us value others with respect and worth, sharing celebration with the joyful and glad, being in solidarity with the suffering and afflicted. Grant us authentic patience and humility. Let our love be genuine. Let our love be lived. Amen. Our worship soon ends. Our service is reignited and begins again this day, this week. In commissioning and benediction, God asks, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" May our reply be, "Here am I, send me." So we are sent with the word into the world, with God's power, love, and peace. Fittingly, our closing hymn to listen to or to sing in private is "I, the Lord of Sea and Sky," page 509 in Voices United.